NBC4 is your local election headquarters. So we have to talk about that big announcement that we saw today. President Joe Biden potentially receiving all of those electoral votes that were needed. But I say potentially because, Colleen, we're still in kind of this weird limbo. So let's just chat a little bit about that.
Well, we are and we aren't in a weird limbo. He has gotten the electoral college votes that he needed from Pennsylvania to put him up to 273, which is he only needed 270. What's different this year than really any election that we've seen in modern times is the president is saying he will not concede and that he will continue to fight. But why we really aren't in limbo is while they have challenged the process in a number of lawsuits in court, what they have not done is shown any actual evidence of fraud. And what they would need to do with this claim that they've got that the election was stolen from him and that there was fraudulent behavior, you got to put up evidence for that. You've got to, you certainly within the president's right, if there's any evidence of fraud, to take it to a court, show it to a federal judge and prove it. The problem for them is they don't have any evidence of that and they can't take that to court and prove it. But that does not mean the president is going to be willing to concede. And the people who are heartbroken, the people who supported him, certainly are not acting like they believe he's lost this election.
And a lot of those claims come from the fact that voting was very different this year. Of course, we are in a global pandemic, so we saw a lot of mail-in ballots. That's why it's taken a little bit longer than what we are used to in terms of counting those votes and getting everything sorted. So I think that's kind of where it comes from, right?
Right. And Ohio, if you remember, Ohio got it right. Ohio's Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who is a Republican, he asked for the right and got permission to get all of those mail-in ballots ready to go, checked the signature. As they were coming in, he had people working hour after hour, getting them ready to go. So in Ohio, those mail-in ballots were the first to be counted. And then that's why you saw Joe Biden with that big lead at the beginning. And then the day of votes were counted. And of course, President Trump carried Ohio by 8 points. But in some other states, and I'll use as an example our neighbor to the north, Michigan, the Secretary of State there wanted to do exactly what Frank LaRose did here in Ohio. She wanted to be able to pre-count, pre-prepare, check the signatures on all those mail-in ballots. The Republican-controlled legislature there would not allow her to do that. And that's why they had just the reverse of the situation we had. They had their day of votes counted first, and then took several days to catch up with all of the mail-in ballots.
And so, I mean, now, it looks like he has those electoral votes that it should be said and done, but with the president saying that he's going to go to the courts, I mean, is this going to be an even more drawn out process? Are we still expecting this to last?
Well, we can say that Joe Biden is the president-elect. We know that the president is not going to concede, but that's not going to change that fact. In fact, Joe Biden on Monday is putting together a task force to deal with coronavirus, which he has said all along he's got to get a handle on COVID if he can take the transition into the economic changes and the climate control changes that he wants to focus on. He believes it all follows COVID. So he's already getting to work. And it's going to be interesting to see how he does that transition, who will make up his transition team. There have been speculation that might include Republicans, maybe someone like John Kasich, who helped with the president's campaign, who endorsed him very publicly at the convention. So he's already getting the work done of transitioning. We are already hearing, though, that the president will not be helping with that transition process, which is usually, part of the tradition of this exchange of power at the nation's capital. But I don't think that's going to stop the Biden-Harris ticket because they have a lot of work to do and they have a lot of fences to mend. The vice president said last night that he had a mandate. He did get the popular vote by 4 or 5 million, but this country is split. And Donald Trump, we have the election going on all these days because Donald Trump also had a record-breaking amount of support. So he's got to, if he really wants to unify people, he's got to start working on that as well.
And speaking of that, I mean, because we saw some states that, traditionally would vote one way, kind of switch this year.
Yeah.
In terms of, we were watching Pennsylvania, Georgia very closely, and it looks like at that last minute when they were counting that things kind of changed from what we were expecting.
This was one of the most unpredictable elections, certainly of our lifetime. And as we've been talking, the polls once again really got it wrong. I interviewed a pollster who's going to be on the spectrum with us, who said one of the reasons that the polling was so difficult is because they could not account for the record number, the amount of voters who turned out. And who either through early election, through mail-in or in-person voting, it was a tremendous amount. It was a record-setting number. It's hard to poll that.
Yeah.
There are other reasons that he went into, but it's one of those, it's been unpredictable, and it certainly is not going to be a transition that's traditional either.
Yeah. And speaking of unpredictable, we have some elected officials here in Ohio that have some plans that things may have changed now that we are looking toward a Democratic president instead of a Republican president, right?
Yeah, I mean, you only have to look at Congress to know that things will change for what their agenda is and how they are going to work. We still don't know who's going to control the Senate. There's going to be runoff races in Georgia, but we now have a president who is a Democrat. We will have a president who's a Democrat. So for someone like Sherrod Brown, who has been pushing for not only for the COVID relief package that the Senate gets back to work on this week, but he's been talking about infrastructure changes. He kind of ran on that dignity of work platform where he wants jobs created through the infrastructure. He's been fighting for broadband access for rural parts of Ohio that still don't have internet capabilities. And so some of those key items for the Brown agenda will probably be a little easier to push through a Biden administration than they would have through Donald Trump. The same thing can be said for someone like Joyce Beatty. She's very close to Nancy Pelosi. If Nancy Pelosi retains the speaker seat, Joyce Beatty will have agenda items. One of the things that she was very concerned about, she's the chairwoman of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee, and the president eliminated all diversity training within the federal workplace. So even in the State Department, they weren't getting diversity training. She was outraged by that. You can bet that through the Biden-Harris administration, they're going to return diversity and inclusion training. Those kinds of things will change for Congress members. You look at someone like a Republican, Steve Stivers, here in Ohio's 15th district. Stivers really has a reputation. In fact, he's been named one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. He is known for working across the aisle. He welcomes Democrats' ideas. He even has been on the record with me in the last few months saying he doesn't want to do away with Obamacare. He thinks it needs to be changed, but he thinks they need to work that health care package the way it is and improve it. That's a radical thing for a Republican to say when the president is pushing and asking the Supreme Court to eliminate the ACA. So for someone like Joe Biden, like Steve Stivers, he could thrive in this environment because he will be willing to work across the aisle. Now, someone like Jim Jordan in Ohio's 4th district, who is known for being much more partisan, of being an outspoken, ardent supporter of Donald Trump, and who pushed the Trump policies to the exclusion of anything the Democrats wanted. This could be a tougher road for him because he's now not only in the minority in the House, but he does not have the support and the backing of the White House.
Yeah, so we could definitely see some changes, especially even here in the Buckeye State. I do briefly want to ask you too about the fact that we will likely have our very first female vice president and woman of color holding that office as well. I mean, how big is that?
It's when you think of the 244-year history of this nation, that this is happening for the very first time, that we have a woman who it's the highest ranking woman ever in the United States of America. She's got a lot to be proud of. I think, in the same way that young girls were looking up to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think girls are going to be looking up to Kamala Harris, that she is setting an example. There's going to be a lot of pressure on her. She's known as being one of the most liberal members of the United States Senate, and there's a lot of resistance to that from the other side of the aisle. There's concern about that. It'll be interesting to see what role she takes in the Biden administration. I don't think she's going to be a backseat vice president. I think when he was vice president, he had a lot of authority. He was put in some key positions by Barack Obama. So I anticipate he's going to have Kamala Harris in some decision-making key positions as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds.
Yeah, definitely is. And as we've said a lot here in the newsroom, this really is just the beginning of everything. Getting through the election, we're just now going to see kind of those policies and what's going to happen here in the Buckeye State, but also, of course, nationwide. Colleen, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, if folks want to hear more about the election, more about how it could affect us right here in Ohio, tune in tomorrow morning on the Spectrum. I know that you have a lot of insight, and we'll hear a lot more about what's going on.
Thank you, Jennifer. This was really weird talking to you like this, but it's been
I know.
fun.
I'm used to just yelling to you a few desks away, right?
Yeah. We call that redneck intercom at my house. We just stand here and yell at each other up the steps.
Yeah, you never have to worry about the connection.
We're two Appalachian girls. We're allowed to just stand and yell at each other.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. It's normal for us. Thanks, Colleen.
Okay, have a good day, hon.
You too.
Bye! Don't put